Welcome to Indus Special. I'm Ejaz Haider. While the Taliban still refuse to talk to Kabul as far as the Doha talks track is concerned, in Moscow they shared the same table for talks and meals with those they're fighting in Afghanistan. 2 days of landmark talks in Moscow ended with a broad but vague statement of shared principles. The content was perhaps less important than the fact of the meeting itself. Also, the resolution determined that the Doha talks must proceed apace, which is very interesting. Meanwhile, President Ashraf Ghani, who doesn't seem much enamored of US efforts to speak directly to the Taliban, and has also given statements against Pakistan, tweeted against Islamabad again with reference to the Pashtun Tahaffuz movement, which is the Pashtun protection movement. The Afghan government, and I quote from his tweet, the Afghan government has serious concerns about the violence perpetrated against peaceful protesters and civil activists in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and Balochistan. And he went on to say in the second tweet, we believe it is the moral responsibility of every government to support civil activities that take a stand against the terrorism and extremism that plagues and threatens our region and collective security. Otherwise, there could be long-standing negative consequences. Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi then took to Twitter and responded, we reject the tweet by President Ashraf Ghani. Such irresponsible statements are only gross interference. Afghan leadership needs to focus on long-standing serious grievances of the people of Afghanistan. To discuss the Afghan peace talks and Ghani's statement, we have with us Rahimullah Yusufzai, who is the resident editor of the News and based in Peshawar, and Brigadier Asad Munir. We will also be joined by former Foreign Minister Hina Rabbani Khar, Najamuddin Shaikh, a former Foreign Secretary, and Harun Najafizada, an Afghan journalist based in northern Afghanistan. But before we get down to talking about the Moscow track and how it has, interestingly, begun to, in a way, supplement the Doha track, let's begin with the tweets by President Ashraf Ghani. Brigadier Asad Munir, we have seen that ever since the Doha track started, President Ashraf Ghani is not particularly enamored. Some of his allies like Amrullah Saleh have also been tweeting against the entire concept of talking to the Taliban directly without including Kabul. And Ashraf Ghani also talked about the key to peace lying in Pakistan, implying that Pakistan is not doing enough. And now with this Pashtun Tahaffuz movement, which is purely a Pakistani movement, Ashraf Ghani tweeted something which can be called undiplomatic. What is your take on that?
I think that, you know, he's frustrated. He feels that he has been sidelined and you know, he's isolated. And there are many events and reasons for that. You know, the Doha talks, the Taliban, they don't want to talk to the Afghan government, the Ashraf Ghani government. Then the recently 2 days meeting in Moscow, which was participated by many from, you know, different, some were warlords, even the Taliban attended, and they came up with 9-point agenda, and he was kept out of it. Then his, you know, previous security advisor, Hanif Atmar, who is going to contest the election against him to go the presidential election.
He was also in Moscow. Yeah.
Yeah, he was in Moscow. And then he thinks that he doesn't like the Pakistan role. He thinks that this role Pakistan didn't play in the past. And the U.S. now staff stance on, you know, Pakistan. They are no more accusing even Trump that, you know, they have safe haven or something like that. And recently a U.S. journal said that the Doha talks were not possible without the support of Pakistan. And then, you know, he's unable to control the violence. And there are, you know, these incidents, terroristic incidents inside the red zone or green zone of Kabul. So all these things combined. So I think one is that he's very unhappy with Pakistan. And then for presidential election, I think the Pashtun nationalist of Afghanistan, he also wants to gain their support by, you know, talking about Pakistan internal affair, which the Afghan government has been doing since 1947. So all these factors combined, so I think that is the reason of his frustration that he came out with this type of tweet, which was, I think, suitably responded. And it was basically, we have never said that, Pashtuns are being killed in Afghanistan, and there are thousands and thousands of them being killed. So I think these are some of the reasons which Ashraf Ghani resulted in Ashraf Ghani's this tweet.
Okay, I'll come back to you with reference to the peace process itself, but let me go across to Rahimullah Yusufzai. Rahimullah Yusufzai, what is your take on these tweets? And Brigadier Munir has given us a perspective on why Ghani might have done what he has done. Would you agree with what Brigadier Munir said in terms of Ghani's isolation and the fact that he's domestically under a lot of political pressure, has been losing allies, and he doesn't really know whether the US is going to support his government or whether these talks could possibly go towards some kind of interim arrangement, which he is obviously extremely opposed to?
Yes, I broadly agree with Brigadier Asad Munir's observations. I believe that the Afghan government has been looking for opportunities to talk about Pakistani's affairs, internal affairs of Pakistan. And they think that, they have this moral authority to talk about the Pashtun rights or the Baloch rights.
When you say that, Rahimullah Yusufzai, when you say that, are you saying, is it like a throwback?
At the time of Pakistan independence, when they were talking about the Pashtun and Baloch rights and rejecting, the Durand line as an international border, and also. So this seems to be a revival of that kind of a propaganda. But they don't realize that it does not have any popular support in Pakistan among the Pashtuns or the Baloch. There are some people, yes, who are ultra-nationalist, and who have welcomed Ashraf Ghani's statement. They believe that their cause has been highlighted, and they think that in Pakistan they are being victimized, but these people are not big in number. So we have to think about that also. Also, I think right now, Ashraf Ghani is involved in the presidential election campaign. It's still a long way off on July 20th. But, he has announced his candidature, he has filed his nomination papers, he has chosen his two running mates. And in fact, some of his own allies, people who were working under him, have challenged him. So he has to show his credential that he is better suited. So
you're basically saying the same thing which Brigadier Munir said in terms of his political isolation. But the interesting thing that you've added is that probably this is a throwback to the earlier period, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, and the 70s. So Brigadier Munir has obviously worked quite a lot on the issue, both in terms of the history of what is known as the Durand Line, which is a recognized international border between Afghanistan and Pakistan. But I'm also joined by Pakistan's former foreign minister, Rabbani Khar. Hina, thank you for your time. I just wanted to ask you, you must have seen the tweets by President Ashraf Ghani, and then there was also the response by the current foreign minister, Shah Mahmood Qureshi. Since you were in that seat, what would you have done if you had seen those tweets? How would you have reacted to it?
Okay, first of all, Ijaz, I think as soon as I saw the tweet, I think I was one of the first people to react, saying that I found it sad that President Ghani decided to react on or thought it appropriate to comment on something which is clearly happening within the borders of Pakistan. And in my view, we are all better served, and we have many problems to fix. I also said that. However, we are all better served, both President Ghani and our Prime Minister, and state apparatus, if we concentrate on what is happening inside our territorial borders and fix that, rather than jumping to comment on others or what is happening within the territorial borders of some other countries. And this I say as much for Ashraf Ghani as I say for ourselves, because I think in this region we have a tendency to want to sort of shove under the carpet things which we are not doing correct, but be very quick to point out what errors others are making. Look, I'm also, by the way, not exceptionally happy with the choice of words that a foreign minister had. I think it was a bit nuanced, might have been better. This rejecting and accepting, we are out of that business. I would, I think right now with the way peace negotiations are going, and I know Pakistan is, of course, trying to get a major share in terms of its.
Yes, about the peace talks. The Americans are also now constantly praising Pakistan and saying, I've had analysts on my program from the US saying, well, it's great that Pakistan is now overtly saying that we are facilitating these talks. But there are spoilers within Afghanistan. We were talking about Ghani earlier before you joined us, and he's under a lot of political pressure. He also believes, and he's been very unhappy with the Americans also, because he thinks that this could possibly lead to some kind of interim arrangement in which he's going to lose out on power, and that's something he's extremely opposed to for obvious reasons.
Sure.
So Pakistan is also playing a very positive role in terms of facilitating the talks, but what to do about spoilers from inside Afghanistan?
Okay, so Ijaz, my assessment of this is again going to be very, I don't want to use the word crude, but it's going to be very realistic. Okay, so I'm not going to mince words and saying, Pakistan is saying very positive. Everybody is being allowed to play a positive role, because the United States, which is frankly speaking the only power that matters in that particular country right now, has decided that it is going to leave. It is going to exit, come what may. Okay?
Correct.
So they are not so concerned about what circumstances exist before they are able to exit. Okay? A very important American recently, in having a discussion, we were having a discussion, and it came out that what they want is just enough period that as they exit, the next 6 months, etc., are a hold-off period, that things don't really fall into or shatter down. They want only that much stability in the country through the. Now, they will obviously, this has been a terrible, never-ending war, but a very, very badly run war also, because they have only relied on military, and that's in a very obnoxious way, and frankly speaking, there are no results to show. So they want to be able to declare victory, and now they come to what Pakistan had always been talking about, a negotiated peace process. So now they've come to that because they have no other option left on the table, right? Now,
Correct.
Pakistan is being allowed to play a positive role, which Pakistan was not allowed to play in the last 10, 15 years, okay? Even then, I'm glad Pakistan is finally sort of doing what it should have been doing 15 years back. Now, given these circumstances, whether there are spoilers in, allow me to say this, in Afghanistan or in Pakistan, what must be done will be done this time, because the United States of America, unlike every time before, has decided is the only way.
That's a very interesting point. Thank you so much, Hina Rabbani, your perspective. Let me quickly go to Rahimullah Yusufzai on this. Rahimullah Yusufzai, would you agree with what Ms. Khar was saying?
No, one of the points she made was that the foreign minister of Pakistan, Shah Mahmood Qureshi, should not have reacted the way he reacted. If you don't react to these kind of, interferences, then it will become a habit. And it will happen again and again. There has to be a limit. There has to be a point where you don't accept such interference. We are reminded all the time that we are interfering in this country or that country. So, we also have to remind people that they cannot interfere in Pakistani affairs. It's not their business. So that, I think, I disagree with her. The Pakistan government at least has to react. Maybe different wording could have been used, but Pakistan has to protest and Pakistan has to react.
Okay, I'm going to take a short break, and at the other end of the break, we will continue with our discussion and take the discussion to the peace process in Afghanistan, including the Moscow track and the Doha track. Stay with us. Welcome back to Indus Special. We continue with our discussion of the Afghan peace process, and now we are also joined by Najamuddin Shaikh, a former foreign secretary, and Harun Najafizada, an Afghan journalist based in northern Afghanistan. Let me kick off with Najamuddin Shaikh Saab. You wrote this piece in Dawn where, with reference to the Moscow track, of course, as you rightly said, it being the brainchild of Zamir Kabulov, who's the Russian representative for Afghanistan, that this Moscow meeting, and I found this paragraph very interesting. It says, this meeting only serves to underline the resurrection of the Northern Alliance and sends out the signal that Afghanistan will return to the position of having the Taliban control much of the territory, but face a Northern Alliance in the north which subsists with the same supporters it had in 1996. So this is going to be a redux of the 90s as far as this particular paragraph is concerned. Would you, sir, care to explain why that would be so?
There was a smattering of Pakhtuns, including notably President Karzai. But the fact of the matter is that the power brokers were the power brokers from the Northern Alliance, the Tanur Muhammad and co. So, you are really talking about an assertion that, look, these are the people who really matter in Afghanistan. And yet, if the reconciliation is to proceed, and it is to proceed in a logical way, it will have to be the recognized, legitimate Iraqi government, which is the lead actor. Not, of course, there should be an expansion of the High Peace Council or of the negotiating team that President Ashraf Ghani has put together. But that is the team that must work with this, not the Northern Alliance.
Ambassador Shaikh, this is very interesting. Let me just go across to Harun Najafizada, who is a journalist based in northern Afghanistan. Harun, Ambassador Shaikh is talking about, as I read out the paragraph, about sort of 90s redux. Would you agree with that assessment, or do you think the situation on the ground has changed largely and there's going to be, if the reconciliation comes about, that it will be inclusive and not exclusionary?
Can I quickly say that we are not talking about Iraq, as Ambassador Shaikh was pointing out, we are talking about Afghanistan. This Afghanistan is quite different to the Afghanistan that Ambassador Shaikh has experienced. We have a different generation that is there enacted in the country, quite strongly believing in democracy, quite strongly connected with the wider world, quite strongly thinking beyond their ethnicities, tribes, and regions. And they are backing the Afghan central government. Those who you've seen in the Moscow summit are also part of the Afghan society, but a large number of them are now outnumbered by the new generation of politicians, intellectuals, technocrats, and others who are leading the government there in Kabul. We now have people.
But the civil society does not really, is not the center of power. I mean, as far as the centers of power are concerned, they're still concentrated in the hands of various groups, including former groups, warlords, satraps, the Taliban themselves. It's a sort of petri dish of multiple power centers.
I think we have seen a transformation in Afghanistan in the past 17 years. I think what we know now is that those power brokers, or the so-called power brokers, have left their space and places for a new generation of Afghan politicians. Look at the Afghan...
Okay, let me go back to Ambassador Shaikh on this. Ambassador Shaikh, you heard Najafizada. He's talking about a newer generation. Of course there is, but the real question is whether that generation is in a position to actually make its presence felt in terms of socio-political and economic power. And on that, your article also mentions that Afghanistan would need to receive assistance beyond 2024, perhaps up to 2030. And you said not one of the regional powers has that kind of money, so it's got to be the US and its European allies. But what we have seen over the years is, of course, that the appetite for constantly pumping money into Afghanistan has been dying down.
You're right, and that is what has to be avoided. Look, let me put it to you this way, as I explained in the article itself, that right now the Afghan exports are about $1 billion. The imports are 8 billion plus.
Yeah.
This 7 billion or 8 billion is what generates a lot of the employment and generates a lot of the income that the Afghan government is collecting. Reduce that and you have a major economic problem on your hand.
Correct.
51% of their budget, the ordinary budget, not the development budget, the ordinary budget comes, which pays for the doctors, the teachers, etc., is foreign assistance.
Absolutely.
Your $4.1 billion is required for your 320,000, well, it's 306,000 now. In the Afghan National Defense Security Forces.
Absolutely, I'm happy you make that. I'm happy you make that point, because that's also something that you have mentioned very clearly, especially with reference to the letter that President Ghani wrote to Trump, in which he said he could offer to reduce by $2 billion the amount needed to support the Afghan National Defense and Security Forces, but also made it clear implicitly, if not explicitly, that assistance was needed to continue for an extended period.
Yeah, quite right. And look, these are things that, these are the realities. The second reality, which I was not able to elaborate upon in my article, is the fact that the government, no matter how weak it may seem, and no matter how, as our colleague from Afghanistan has pointed out, that there are new centers, there are new technocrats, there's a new Afghanistan. The fact of the matter remains that this new Afghanistan also has to take the reconciliation through a particular process. That process can only be done by the recognized legitimate government of Afghanistan. Now, relations between the legitimate government of Afghanistan and Pakistan are somewhat, more than somewhat strained. But the fact is that this is the only government that can then sit down and chalk out what reconciliation will entail. Now,
that's an interesting point, because the problem is that the Taliban are still not prepared to sit with the Kabul government. Of course, it's going to be a phased process. So
no. I don't agree. The people who went to Moscow.
No, I wasn't talking about the Moscow. I wasn't talking about the Moscow track. I was talking about the Doha track. In Moscow, as I mentioned before you joined us, that interestingly enough, the Taliban reps sat at the same table and talked and had meals with the people they're fighting on the ground in Afghanistan. So I was talking about the Doha track, not the Moscow track.
The Doha track is exactly what I want to talk about. The Doha track has to move with a government that is recognized, and that government will work out the terms of the reconciliation. It's not going to be merely the fact that there is a ceasefire.
But that is the sticking point.
But that is the point. I mean, how do
I know,
you
that is the point, but that's also the sticking point. That's the problem.
I'm not sure that what you mean by the second point.
No, I said that is the point. I agree with you, but that's also the sticking point. Yeah. So on that, hold that thought. Let me just go over to Rahimullah Yusufzai. Rahimullah Yusufzai, Ambassador, is absolutely correct that there's got to be some kind of arrangement where the Taliban and other groups start talking to the government in Kabul. Now, the government in Kabul, in and of itself, is a concept that is not being agreed upon by the Taliban. So it's like there's a catch-22 here. Would you agree with me?
I think I agree that you have to talk eventually to the Afghan government. Yeah. You know, it's legal, constitutional, internationally recognized, and elected as well. But look, this government actually has lost most of its prominent people. Yeah. Those people also went to Moscow. You know, Hanif Atbar was the national security advisor to Ashraf Ghani. If he was part of the government now, Taliban would have refused to meet him. Yeah. Muhammad Mohaqqik, who was the deputy chief executive of Ashraf Ghani's and Abdullah's government, he was also in Moscow. And Taliban
and he has also been fired he was earlier fired by Ashraf Ghani.
Government. Yeah. So the people who were in Moscow, they also have support in Afghanistan, you know, and you cannot just dismiss them. They're in opposition. You know, the 38 people who were in Moscow, they included the former leaders and the future leaders of Afghanistan.
Okay, that's an interesting point. Future leaders. Well. Let me go back to Ambassador. Let me go back to Ambassador Shaikh for last thoughts by him. Where exactly do you think the situation is likely to go in the next month or couple of months?
Fatmar is a candidate for the presidential office in the July elections. He is one of 13 or 14 candidates who already
filed the nomination papers
fighting the election. Yeah. So his departure was not unexpected. The whole point is this, that if there is going to be a structured dialogue, that dialogue has to be one in which the negotiating team from President Ghani's side has to be expanded. There is no question about that. There has to be an expansion. It has to include some of the people who were in Moscow also, because that is where that is what the Americans have said. Pompeo said very clearly that, as I said in my article, that this has to be expanded, even though President Ghani had very reassuring noises to make about his conversation with Pompeo, but he deliberately left out, I think, the point that the Afghan government and other Afghan parties
absolutely, and I think Zalmay Khalilzad really summed it up well, and you've quoted him also that nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. Thank you so much, Ambassador Shaikh, for talking to us. Let me go across to Harun Najafizada. Harun Najafizada, what is your sense of the phase process as far as the Doha track is concerned?
I strongly believe that Pakistan is playing a positive role in bringing in the Taliban to the negotiating table in Doha as well as in Moscow. I think the Taliban leaders, Sheikh Mohammed Abbas Taniqzai and others, have been facilitated, in terms of providing passport, travel arrangements, and all sorts of activities related to that, to go to Doha and to Moscow to talk to the Afghan and American sides, which is a good sign. I think the people in Afghanistan appreciate that. But what is required now is a bigger, broader positive gesture from Pakistan to encourage the Taliban to talk to the Afghan government. If that does not happen, as you were rightly saying, we will be sticking a problem which would be difficult.
Thank you so much, Harun Najafizada, for speaking with us. Quickly to Brigadier Asad Munir. Brigadier Munir, what is your sense of where the process is likely to go?
I think in the end, Taliban would agree to talk to the government, because as Ashraf Ghani has said, that at the end of the peace deal, the decision maker will be the Afghan government, and they can't sideline us. And American, they would convince the Taliban that this is the peace deal, this is how the negotiation have developed and progressed. Now we will talk to the Afghan government, and then you have a meeting. And I think the way they have gone with President Karzai to Moscow, and President Karzai, you will remember that he was he opposed in the Qatar Doha talks in 2013, that they are raising the flag of Islamic Emirate. So I think they will agree. And US, before leaving, they will make some arrangement. I don't know whether, the Taliban have already said that we have no plans to, capture the whole of Afghanistan through military means. And they now know that they are talking to different people, the people from north and from different ethnicity. So I think if the US wants, now they have stopped accusing Pakistan.
Right,
and,
right. I need to wrap this up now. So quickly back to Rahimullah Yusufzai. Rahimullah Yusufzai, one of the interesting things in the resolution after the Moscow round is about the Doha track and the idea that it should proceed apace. Now, do you think this is now in an indirect way supplementing the Doha talks?
I think everybody agrees that the most important stakeholder maker is the U.S. in Afghanistan. And that's why they say that Doha track is very important, and Taliban and the U.S. have to make up their mind and go ahead. I think everybody will be waiting for the 25th of February meeting, where maybe they are able to achieve something more beyond the initial, breakthrough in the talks. I think that now Taliban will insist on at least 4, points, which they call CBMs. One is they will insist that the names of their members are removed from the UN Security Council sanctions list. Secondly, they will demand release of their prisoners.
Correct.
Thirdly, they will insist that there should be a formal Taliban office in Doha, Qatar. They were allowed to open an office in 2013, which was closed down because Karzai said this is a parallel government or government in self-exile, whatever. And the fourth thing they want is an end to the propaganda against Taliban.
Absolutely, and interestingly enough, these points are also reflected in the resolution post-Moscow round. Anyway, this is all we have for today. We shall see you with Indus Special next week. Until then, it's goodbye.